Rachel Porter had left her dangerous past behind. A single mother, she worked tirelessly to rebuild her life and provide a safe home for her young son, Jacob. But the cartel didn't care about her story. They wanted her land for their smuggling operations. Unfortunately for them, Rachel wasn't just a farmer. She was a former CIA operative. Now, with her family and home threatened, she must unleash the skills she had sworn never to use again. The enemy thinks they've caught her off guard. They have no idea she's already 10 steps ahead. Rachel stood on her front porch, the morning sun warming the vast fields that surrounded her property. Jacob played near the barn, laughing as Shadow, their loyal German shepherd, chased a ball across the yard. For a moment, peace surrounded them. But Rachel's instincts told her it wouldn't last. 2 black SUVs pulled up to the farm entrance, breaking the calm. Men in dark clothes stepped out, their faces hard with intimidation. Rachel's stomach tightened. She had seen men like these before. Cartel enforcers. "Jacob, go inside," she called out, keeping her voice calm. The boy hesitated but obeyed, running into the house with Shadow following close behind. Rachel stood on her front porch, the morning sun warming the vast fields that surrounded her property. Jacob played near the barn, laughing as Shadow, their loyal German shepherd, chased a ball across the yard. For a moment, peace surrounded them. But Rachel's instincts told her it wouldn't last. 2 black SUVs pulled up to the farm entrance, breaking the calm. Men in dark clothes stepped out, their faces hard with intimidation. Rachel's stomach tightened. She had seen men like these before. Cartel enforcers. "Jacob, go inside," she called out, keeping her voice calm. The boy hesitated but obeyed, running into the house with Shadow following close behind. A man with a scar running down his face approached Rachel, his eyes cold and calculating. "Miss Porter," he said, his tone deceptively polite. "We've heard you've been doing well here. Beautiful land, lots of potential. The kind of place that could support our operations." Rachel crossed her arms. "I'm not interested in selling." The man chuckled darkly. "This isn't a negotiation. You have 48 hours to vacate. If not, we'll make sure you understand the consequences." Rachel didn't flinch, though her heart pounded. "You should leave now," she said, her voice steady. The man's smile faded. "Don't be stupid. You can't protect this place alone." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." The enforcers exchanged looks before retreating to their vehicles. Dust kicked up as the SUVs sped away, leaving Rachel standing silently on the porch. Inside the house, Jacob watched her with wide eyes. "Mom, who were those men?" "People who don't understand what they've walked into," Rachel replied. "Go get Shadow. We've got work to do." That evening, Rachel made a secure call to Daniel Cross, a former CIA operative she trusted. His voice came through the line, calm but alert. "Rachel? Haven't heard from you in a while," he said. "I need your help," she replied. "The cartel's making a move on my farm. They don't know who I am, but they will soon." Daniel let out a low whistle. "Cartel? Huh? You always did attract the wrong kind of attention. What's your plan?" "Defend and neutralize," Rachel said firmly. "But I could use intel and backup." "You've got it," Daniel promised. "I'll mobilize a few old friends. We'll be there by morning. Until then, stay sharp." "I always do," Rachel said before hanging up. She turned to Shadow, who sat patiently by her side. "Ready for another mission, boy?" Shadow barked softly, as if understanding the weight of her words. Rachel spent the rest of the night preparing. She examined the farm's layout, noting vulnerable points and areas where she could set traps. Memories of past missions flooded back. Nights spent in hostile territories, outthinking and outmaneuvering enemies far more powerful than her. This time, the fight was personal. By the time dawn arrived, Rachel was ready. Rachel woke before sunrise, her mind already in battle mode. She moved quietly around the house, gathering tools and supplies. Outside, the vast expanse of her farm lay in peaceful stillness, but she knew that peace wouldn't last. Today, she would turn her home into a fortress. Shadow padded beside her, his sharp eyes scanning the yard as if he could sense the tension in the air. Rachel knelt down and scratched behind his ears. "They don't know who they're messing with," she whispered. Shadow gave a soft bark of agreement. Jacob appeared at the back door, rubbing his eyes. "What are you doing, Mom?" "Just some early chores," Rachel replied. She didn't want to frighten him with too many details. "Go eat breakfast. We've got a lot to do today." Once Jacob was safely inside, Rachel got to work setting traps around the farm. She planted tripwires at key entry points and rigged hidden smoke grenades along the fence line. These weren't ordinary defenses. They were designed to confuse and disorient anyone trying to breach the property. As she secured a tripwire near the barn, Rachel's phone buzzed. Daniel's voice came through. "Rachel, my team's en route," he said. "We've intercepted some chatter. The cartel's sending scouts today to scope out your farm." "Let them come," Rachel said. "They won't get far. Be careful. Diego Valdez, the guy running this operation, isn't just another thug. He's tactical. He'll test your defenses before going all in." "I've dealt with worse than Diego," Rachel replied coolly. "Thanks for the warning." She ended the call and glanced toward the horizon. Shadow sniffed the air, his ears twitching. The enemy was coming. Once Jacob was safely inside, Rachel got to work setting traps around the farm. She planted tripwires at key entry points and rigged hidden smoke grenades along the fence line. These weren't ordinary defenses. They were designed to confuse and disorient anyone trying to breach the property. As she secured a tripwire near the barn, Rachel's phone buzzed. Daniel's voice came through. "Rachel, my team's en route," he said. "We've intercepted some chatter. The cartel's sending scouts today to scope out your farm." "Let them come," Rachel said. "They won't get far. Be careful. Diego Valdez, the guy running this operation, isn't just another thug. He's tactical. He'll test your defenses before going all in." "I've dealt with worse than Diego," Rachel replied coolly. "Thanks for the warning." She ended the call and glanced toward the horizon. Shadow sniffed the air, his ears twitching. The enemy was coming. Once Jacob was safely inside, Rachel got to work setting traps around the farm. She planted tripwires at key entry points and rigged hidden smoke grenades along the fence line. These weren't ordinary defenses. They were designed to confuse and disorient anyone trying to breach the property. As she secured a tripwire near the barn, Rachel's phone buzzed. Daniel's voice came through. "Rachel, my team's en route," he said. "We've intercepted some chatter. The cartel's sending scouts today to scope out your farm." "Let them come," Rachel said. "They won't get far. Be careful. Diego Valdez, the guy running this operation, isn't just another thug. He's tactical. He'll test your defenses before going all in." "I've dealt with worse than Diego," Rachel replied coolly. "Thanks for the warning." She ended the call and glanced toward the horizon. Shadow sniffed the air, his ears twitching. The enemy was coming. Once Jacob was safely inside, Rachel got to work setting traps around the farm. She planted tripwires at key entry points and rigged hidden smoke grenades along the fence line. These weren't ordinary defenses. They were designed to confuse and disorient anyone trying to breach the property. As she secured a tripwire near the barn, Rachel's phone buzzed. Daniel's voice came through. "Rachel, my team's en route," he said. "We've intercepted some chatter. The cartel's sending scouts today to scope out your farm." "Let them come," Rachel said. "They won't get far. Be careful. Diego Valdez, the guy running this operation, isn't just another thug. He's tactical. He'll test your defenses before going all in." "I've dealt with worse than Diego," Rachel replied coolly. "Thanks for the warning." She ended the call and glanced toward the horizon. Shadow sniffed the air, his ears twitching. The enemy was coming. Once Jacob was safely inside, Rachel got to work setting traps around the farm. She planted tripwires at key entry points and rigged hidden smoke grenades along the fence line. These weren't ordinary defenses. They were designed to confuse and disorient anyone trying to breach the property. As she secured a tripwire near the barn, Rachel's phone buzzed. Daniel's voice came through. "Rachel, my team's en route," he said. "We've intercepted some chatter. The cartel's sending scouts today to scope out your farm." "Let them come," Rachel said. "They won't get far. Be careful. Diego Valdez, the guy running this operation, isn't just another thug. He's tactical. He'll test your defenses before going all in." "I've dealt with worse than Diego," Rachel replied coolly. "Thanks for the warning." She ended the call and glanced toward the horizon. Shadow sniffed the air, his ears twitching. The enemy was coming. Once Jacob was safely inside, Rachel got to work setting traps around the farm. She planted tripwires at key entry points and rigged hidden smoke grenades along the fence line. These weren't ordinary defenses. They were designed to confuse and disorient anyone trying to breach the property. As she secured a tripwire near the barn, Rachel's phone buzzed. Daniel's voice came through. "Rachel, my team's en route," he said. "We've intercepted some chatter. The cartel's sending scouts today to scope out why." "Let them come," Rachel said. "They won't get far. Be careful. Diego Valdez, the guy running this operation, isn't just another thug. He's tactical. He'll test your defenses before going all in." "I've dealt with worse than Diego," Rachel replied coolly. "Thanks for the warning." She ended the call and glanced toward the horizon. Shadow sniffed the air, his ears twitching. The enemy was coming. Later that afternoon, Rachel spotted movement near the eastern fence. 2 cartel scouts approached cautiously, their weapons at the ready. Rachel watched from a concealed vantage point, holding her binoculars steady. "They're testing the perimeter," she muttered. She gave a hand signal to Shadow, who silently crept toward the scouts. The first scout tripped a hidden wire, triggering a burst of smoke. "What the hell?" he coughed, waving his hand in front of his face. The second scout panicked and stepped into a concealed trench, falling hard. "Idiots!" the second scout hissed as he climbed out of the hole. "We need to report this." Before they could move, Shadow launched out of the underbrush, knocking the first man to the ground. The scout screamed, struggling against the dog's powerful jaws. Rachel appeared a moment later, her weapon drawn. "Don't move," she ordered coldly. The second scout raised his hands in fear. We didn't mean any harm." Rachel snorted. "Sure you didn't. Now, you're going to tell me everything Diego has planned." Back at the farmhouse, Rachel bound the scouts and questioned them. At first, they refused to talk, but her commanding presence and Shadow's intimidating growl quickly broke their resolve. "He's planning a full assault in 24 hours, one scout finally admitted. "He thinks you'll either run or surrender." "Big mistake," Rachel said, standing up. "You can thank your boss for what's coming next." She left the scouts tied up and contacted Daniel. "They're moving faster than expected. We need to escalate our preparations." "Understood," Daniel replied. "We'll be there soon. Hold the line until we arrive." "I'll hold more than that," Rachel said. "I'm going to send Diego a message." Rachel walked back outside, her mind racing with strategy. The enemy thought they had the upper hand, but she was going to turn the tables on them in ways they'd never expect. "This is my farm," she whispered to herself, "and I'm taking it back." Shadow barked once, as if giving his approval. The fight was only beginning. Rachel stood on the roof of the barn, scanning the surrounding fields through a pair of binoculars. The horizon stretched endlessly, peaceful and quiet under the fading afternoon sun. But Rachel knew the quiet wouldn't last. Diego Valdez and his men would strike soon. They were out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to make their move. Shadow sat beside her, his ears perked and alert. His sharp instincts had saved her more times than she could count during their years together. Rachel lowered the binoculars and sighed. "They're coming," she murmured. Shadow huffed softly in agreement. As Rachel climbed down from the roof, she spotted Jacob practicing with his drone in the yard. He maneuvered it through tight loops and turns, clearly trying to distract himself from the tension around him. "Jacob," Rachel called gently, walking toward him. He lowered the controller and looked at her nervously. "Are the bad guys really coming, Mom?" Rachel crouched beside him and rested a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, they are. But I need you to be brave, okay? We've got a plan, and you're going to help." "Me?" Jacob asked, his eyes widening. "Yeah," Rachel said with a small smile. "You're going to use that drone of yours to keep an eye on the farm. If you see anything suspicious, you let me know right away." Jacob straightened his posture and nodded. "I won't let you down." Rachel hugged him tightly. "I know you won't," Shadow barked, drawing their attention toward the tree line at the edge of the property. Rachel squinted, noticing faint movement. "Scouts again," she muttered under her breath. She turned to Jacob. Take Shadow inside and stay there. I'll handle this. Jacob obeyed, running toward the house with Shadow following close behind. Rachel grabbed her rifle and moved swiftly toward a concealed position near the fence. Rachel waited in the shadows as two figures emerged from the tree line. At first glance, they seemed to be cartel scouts, but something was off. They moved too carelessly, as if they wanted to be seen. Rachel tightened her grip on the rifle, her instincts warning her that it was a diversion. They're trying to bait me out, she thought. She scanned the area carefully and spotted a second group of men flanking the property from the west. The decoys were just a distraction. The real threat was moving in from the side. Nice try, Diego, Rachel whispered. She activated her radio. Daniel, we've got movement. They're trying to flank the property. Copy that, Daniel replied. We're almost in position. Hold tight. Rachel quietly repositioned herself, moving toward the western perimeter. She needed to slow the cartel down long enough for her team to arrive. The cartel soldiers moved cautiously through the tall grass, unaware that Rachel had anticipated their approach. She watched from cover, her finger resting on the trigger. When the lead man stepped into a clearing, Rachel fired a warning shot that struck the ground near his feet. The group froze, startled by the sudden gunfire. Turn around and leave, Rachel called out, her voice cold and authoritative. This is your only warning. One of the men laughed nervously. You think you can scare us? We've got orders to take this place. Then you'll die trying, Rachel replied. The soldiers hesitated. Rachel used the moment to launch a smoke grenade, filling the clearing with thick, choking fog. Chaos erupted as the cartel men stumbled in confusion, unable to see. Rachel picked off two of them with precise shots before retreating further into the shadows. She's playing with us, one of the men shouted. Fall back, another yelled. It's a trap. As the cartel soldiers retreated, Daniel's team arrived on the scene. They moved swiftly, surrounding the remaining intruders and forcing them to surrender. You really know how to make an entrance, Daniel said with a grin as he approached Rachel. Timing's everything, Rachel replied, lowering her rifle. The cartel men were restrained and taken for questioning. Daniel looked around the farm, noting the smoke still lingering in the air. They'll come back stronger next time, he warned. I'm counting on it, Rachel said. We'll be ready. Back at the house, Jacob ran out to meet them with Shadow at his side. Did we win? Jacob asked eagerly. For now, Rachel replied. But this isn't over. They'll try again, and we need to be ready. Shadow barked, standing protectively beside Rachel. His presence was a constant reminder that they weren't alone in this fight. We've got one chance to end this, Rachel continued. Next time, we take Diego down for good. The team nodded in agreement. The storm was far from over, but Rachel had turned the tide in her favor. Night fell over the farm, shrouding it in an uneasy calm. Rachel stood on the back porch, listening to the distant sounds of the countryside. For the moment, all was quiet, but she knew that wouldn't last. Diego Valdez had suffered an embarrassing defeat today, and someone like him wouldn't take that lightly. He would retaliate soon, and with more force. Shadow lay at Rachel's feet, his head resting on his paws but his eyes alert. Jacob watched from the living room window, worry etched on his face. You should get some sleep, Daniel suggested, stepping out onto the porch. Rachel shook her head. Can't afford to. He'll hit us again soon, and I want to be ready. You're not wrong, Daniel admitted. But we've got a solid team. We'll hold the line. Rachel sighed softly, glancing toward the dark horizon. We'll need more than that. He's cornered now, and that makes him unpredictable. At a remote hideout miles away, Diego Valdez stood in front of his remaining soldiers, his eyes burning with rage. That woman humiliated us, he growled. She's not just some farmer. She's dangerous, and she's making us look weak. One of his lieutenants shifted nervously. We underestimated her, boss. Maybe we should pull back and regroup. Diego slammed his fist on the table. No. We finished this now. We'll bring everything we have. Vehicles, heavy weapons, all of it. I want her farm turned to ash. He pointed to another lieutenant. Send word to our contacts in the region. I want reinforcements by dawn. No more mistakes. The soldiers nodded and hurried to carry out his orders. Diego took a deep breath, his mind already formulating a plan to catch Rachel off guard. Back at the farm, Rachel received an unexpected call. It wasn't from Daniel or any of her contacts. It was from Diego himself. She answered cautiously, her voice steady. "Valdez," she said coldly. Diego's voice crackled over the line. "I have to admit, you surprised me, Rachel. You've been full of tricks so far. But we both know how this ends." "Yeah," Rachel replied. "With you in handcuffs or a coffin." Diego chuckled darkly. "You're brave. I'll give you that. But your time's running out. I've got more men on the way, professionals. You can't protect that farm forever." "We'll see," Rachel said, hanging up without waiting for a response. She turned to Daniel, who had overheard the conversation. "Looks like he's making his move," Daniel said. "Good," Rachel replied. "Let him come. We'll be ready." The team spent the next few hours reinforcing the farm's defenses. Rachel guided Jacob through more drone exercises, teaching him how to scout from a safe distance. Shadow patrolled the perimeter, his presence a comforting constant for both Rachel and her son. As dawn approached, the team gathered in the barn to finalize their strategy. Kara provided a live feed from her surveillance drones, showing multiple vehicles moving toward the property from different directions. "That's a lot of firepower," Danny observed. "Diego's bringing everything he's got," Daniel confirmed. "But we've got the terrain advantage. He won't get far if we play this right." Rachel nodded, her mind racing through different scenarios. "We control the battlefield. If we keep them disoriented, they won't stand a chance." Rachel revealed one of her trump cards, a series of improvised traps hidden throughout the fields. Some were designed to create controlled explosions, while others triggered noise distractions and smoke clouds. "This farm is a maze to anyone who doesn't know it," she explained. "We're going to make them chase ghosts." Jacob grinned nervously. "They're not going to know what hit them." By mid-morning, the first wave of cartel vehicles reached the farm's perimeter. Diego's men disembarked, weapons drawn, and began moving cautiously through the fields. "Here they come," Daniel said over the radio. Rachel took a deep breath, positioning herself behind a barricade near the barn. She gave a hand signal to Shadow, who darted ahead to take up a flanking position. The cartel soldiers advanced slowly, their eyes scanning the area for traps. One man triggered a hidden tripwire, setting off a smoke grenade. "Smoke!" someone shouted. Panic spread as more traps detonated, creating a chaotic fog across the fields. Rachel used the confusion to fire precise shots, taking down several men before they could regroup. "They're breaking formation," Daniel reported. "Good," Rachel muttered. "Keep the pressure on." Diego's voice came over the enemy radios. "Hold your positions. She's trying to scare you." But the damage was done. The cartel's advance slowed to a crawl as Rachel's traps and tactical maneuvers threw them into disarray. Shadow attacked from the flanks, taking down isolated soldiers and sowing further confusion. "This isn't a fight," one cartel soldier whispered fearfully. "It's a trap." "We need to fall back," another shouted. "No retreat." Diego barked angrily. "We finished this." Rachel could feel the momentum shifting in her favor. The cartel had walked into her web, and now it was time to tighten the noose. She activated a signal on her radio, coordinating with Daniel's team to launch a full counterattack. "We push them out," she ordered. No mercy. The final battle had begun, and Rachel was determined to end it on her terms. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the farm. Smoke lingered in the air, blending with the morning mist as Rachel and her team prepared for the next phase of the fight. The cartel was scattered and disorganized, their initial momentum crushed by Rachel's traps. But Diego Valdez wouldn't give up easily. She could hear his men shouting orders as they regrouped beyond the perimeter. Rachel crouched near a barricade, her rifle steady in her hands. "This is where we break them," she whispered to herself. Shadow moved silently beside her, his eyes focused on the tree line where more cartel soldiers were emerging. Rachel gave a hand signal to Daniel, who was positioned near the western edge of the property. "All teams, execute Phase 2, she said over the radio. Daniel's team detonated a series of remote explosives near the cartel's position. Dirt and debris exploded into the air, creating a shockwave that sent enemy soldiers diving for cover. "Move," Push them back, Daniel shouted. Rachel fired several shots, taking down 2 cartel soldiers who were caught in the open. The sudden blast caused chaos among the attackers. Shadow darted forward, targeting an isolated guard. The man didn't even have time to scream before Shadow knocked him to the ground and disarmed him. The cartel's lines broke as confusion spread through their ranks. They're panicking, Daniel reported over the radio. Good, Rachel replied. Keep them disoriented. Don't let them regroup. Diego's voice crackled angrily over the enemy's radios. Get back into formation. Control the field. But the soldiers weren't listening. Rachel's tactics had shattered their confidence, and many began retreating toward their vehicles. Unwilling to accept defeat, Diego ordered one of his lieutenants to lead a flanking attack. While the majority of the cartel forces were distracted, a small group of heavily armed enforcers moved along the southern perimeter, hoping to breach the farm from behind. Rachel, we've got movement on the south side, Daniel warned. They're trying to flank us. Rachel cursed under her breath. I was wondering when you'd try that, Diego. She quickly adjusted their defense plan. Joanna, take your team and reinforce the south line. We can't let them get behind us. Rachel grabbed her rifle and sprinted toward the southern fence. Shadow ran ahead, his instincts guiding him through the maze of defenses they had set up earlier. Rachel reached the southern edge just as the cartel flanking team breached the fence. The men moved with military precision, clearly the best fighters Diego had brought with him. Hold the line, Rachel shouted as she took cover behind a haystack and opened fire. The air filled with the crack of gunfire. Shadow flanked the attackers from the side, leaping onto one of the soldiers and dragging him to the ground. Joanna and her team arrived moments later, adding their firepower to the battle. They're pinned, Joanna called out. Don't let them fall back, Rachel ordered. We take them out here. While Rachel and the others were engaged in the firefight, Jacob was stationed at the house, monitoring the area with his drone. As he guided the drone over the southern fields, he spotted something that made his blood run cold. One of Diego's snipers hidden in a tree, aiming directly at Rachel's position. Mom! Jacob yelled into the radio. There's a sniper in the tree near the south fence. He's aiming at you. Rachel didn't hesitate. She ducked behind cover just as a bullet struck the haystack where she had been moments before. Nice catch, Jacob, she said, her heart pounding. Shadow, take him out. Shadow dashed toward the tree, moving low to avoid detection. The sniper didn't see the dog until it was too late. Shadow leapt onto the trunk, clawing his way up just far enough to force the man to lose his balance. The sniper tumbled from the tree, landing hard on the ground. Meanwhile, Diego's frustration reached a boiling point. His men were falling apart, and the battle wasn't going in his favor. As he barked orders into his radio, one of his lieutenants, Marco, hesitated. Boss, maybe we should pull back, Marco suggested. We've already lost too many. Diego glared at him. You want to run like a coward? We finish this now, or you'll answer to me. But Marco had seen enough. He dropped his weapon and stepped back. You're on your own, Diego. This is suicide. Several other soldiers followed Marco's lead, abandoning the fight. Diego watched in disbelief as a large portion of his remaining force retreated into the forest. You traitors, he screamed. Get back here. With the enemy's morale shattered, Rachel and her team launched a final push. Gunfire echoed across the fields as the remaining cartel soldiers were captured or forced to flee. Rachel approached one of the captured enforcers, her expression cold. Where's Diego? The man hesitated before pointing toward a cluster of trees near the eastern fence. He ran that way. Rachel nodded and signaled for Shadow to follow her. We're not letting him escape. Rachel and Shadow moved swiftly through the woods, tracking Diego's trail. The once powerful cartel leader was now running for his life, his plans in ruins. This ends today, Rachel whispered, her eyes narrowing. The hunt was on, and Diego was out of time. Rachel and Shadow moved quietly through the dense woods, following the trail Diego had left in his desperate retreat. Broken branches, boot prints in the dirt, and the occasional drop of blood marked his path. Rachel's pulse was steady, her senses heightened by years of training. This wasn't the first time she'd hunted a fleeing enemy, but this time, it was personal. Shadow sniffed the ground, his ears twitching. He let out a low growl, signaling they were getting closer. "Good boy," Rachel whispered, gripping her rifle tighter. In the distance, she could hear faint rustling and labored breathing. Diego was on the move, but slowing down. He was wounded, tired, and vulnerable. Rachel advanced cautiously, aware that Diego might try to turn the tables. Her instincts proved correct when Shadow suddenly stopped and barked sharply. Rachel froze and scanned the area ahead. A thin wire glinted in the morning light. Diego had rigged an improvised tripwire attached to an explosive. "Crafty," Rachel muttered, disarming the trap with practiced ease. She called Shadow back to her side. Further down the path, Diego crouched behind a tree, watching. He smirked, thinking the trap had bought him time. But when he didn't hear an explosion, his expression darkened. "They're still coming," he whispered, fear creeping into his voice. He pushed himself to his feet and stumbled deeper into the forest. Rachel continued moving, her eyes sweeping the area for more traps. "You're getting sloppy, Diego," she said quietly. "You can't hide forever." The trail led to a rocky ravine, where the forest thinned out. Rachel paused at the edge, studying the terrain below. Shadow growled softly, sensing movement. "There," Rachel said, spotting Diego limping toward a cluster of boulders. He was using the rocks for cover, trying to find a defensible position. Just as Rachel prepared to move in, her radio crackled. Daniel's voice came through. "Rachel, we're closing in on your position. We intercepted some of Diego's remaining men trying to regroup. They didn't get far." "Good timing," Rachel replied. "I've got eyes on Diego. He's holed up near a ravine, probably planning to make a last stand." "Need backup?" Daniel asked. "No," Rachel said firmly. "This is between me and him. Just secure the perimeter. I don't want any surprises." "Understood. Stay sharp." Rachel clipped the radio to her vest and signaled Shadow to flank Diego's position. The dog moved silently through the brush, his instincts honed from years of working alongside her. Rachel approached from the opposite side, her footsteps muffled by the soft forest floor. Diego was crouched behind a large boulder, his pistol shaking in his hand. His eyes darted around, wild with desperation. "Diego," Rachel called out, her voice echoing through the ravine. "It's over. You're out of men, out of options. Surrender now, and maybe you'll live to see a courtroom." Diego laughed bitterly. "You think you've won? You think taking me down will end this? There are others, bigger and stronger than me. Killing me won't change anything." "I'm not here to argue," Rachel replied. "Drop the weapon." "Or what?" Diego sneered. "You going to shoot me in cold blood, in front of your son?" Rachel's jaw tightened. "Last warning, Diego." Diego hesitated, then raised his pistol. But before he could aim, Shadow lunged from the side, knocking him off balance. The gun flew from his hand, clattering to the ground. Rachel rushed forward, pinning Diego to the ground as Shadow stood guard, teeth bared. "It's done," Rachel said coldly, securing Diego's wrists with zip ties. "You have no idea what's coming," Diego spat. "This isn't the end." "We'll see about that," Rachel replied, pulling him to his feet. As Daniel and the rest of the team arrived to secure the scene, Rachel noticed a strange symbol tattooed on Diego's wrist. She recognized it from her time in the CIA, a mark associated with a larger criminal syndicate operating across multiple regions. "What's this?" she demanded, pointing to the tattoo. Diego smirked. "You think I was in charge? I'm just a soldier. There's someone else, someone who won't be happy about this." Daniel exchanged a worried glance with Rachel. "That explains a lot. This wasn't just a local operation. We might have just stirred up a hornet's nest." Rachel exhaled slowly. "Good. Let them come. We'll be ready." Law enforcement arrived shortly after, taking Diego and the remaining cartel soldiers into custody. Sheriff Walker approached Rachel, shaking his head in disbelief. "You've done more for this town than anyone else ever has," Walker said. "Diego's capture is going to send shockwaves through the whole region." "Let's hope it keeps people safe," Rachel replied. "But something tells me this isn't over." Walker frowned. "You think they'll retaliate?" "They always do," Rachel said grimly. But I'm not going anywhere. As the team returned to the farm, the atmosphere finally began to relax. Jacob ran out to greet them, hugging Rachel tightly. Did you get him? He asked. Rachel smiled and nodded. Yeah, we got him. Shadow barked happily, wagging his tail as Jacob petted him. The boy grinned, his fear finally melting away. We're safe now, Jacob whispered. For now, Rachel said softly, glancing toward the horizon. She knew that peace was never permanent, but for tonight, they had earned a moment of calm. The farm stood strong, just like the people who defended it. With Diego captured and the cartel's immediate threat eliminated, the farm returned to an uneasy calm. For the first time in days, Rachel allowed herself a brief moment of rest. She watched the sunset from the front porch, sipping coffee as Shadow lay at her feet. Jacob played near the barn, his laughter filling the air, a sound she had missed more than she realized. But Rachel knew the fight wasn't over. Diego's warning echoed in her mind. There's someone else. Later that night, Rachel received an encrypted message from a familiar source, Miguel Estrada, a former cartel member she had taken down during her CIA days. He had been in hiding for years, but occasionally provided intelligence when major threats emerged. The message was brief but urgent. Diego worked for Salvador Cortez. He knows you took his man. Watch your back. He's coming. Rachel frowned and leaned back in her chair. Salvador Cortez. The name sent a chill down her spine. He was one of the most dangerous players in the cartel world, known for his cunning and brutal efficiency. If he had been supporting Diego's operation, capturing Diego was only the beginning. Daniel needs to hear about this, she muttered, pulling out her phone. Daniel picked up on the second ring. Rachel? What's going on? Diego wasn't the top of the chain, Rachel explained. He was working for Salvador Cortez. We've got a much bigger problem now. Daniel let out a low whistle. Cortez, huh? That's bad news. He doesn't play games. If he's involved, you're on his radar now. I figured, Rachel said grimly. We need to dig into his network. If he retaliates, I want to see him coming. Got it, Daniel replied. I'll reach out to some contacts. In the meantime, keep the farm on lockdown. I will, Rachel promised. The next morning, Jacob was flying his drone over the property when he noticed something unusual on the surveillance feed. A black SUV was parked near the edge of the forest, just outside the farm's perimeter. Mom, Jacob called out, running to the house. Rachel reviewed the drone footage and felt her stomach tighten. The SUV wasn't moving, but the fact that someone was watching the farm from a distance was enough to set off alarms in her mind. They're scouting us, Rachel said quietly. Is it the cartel again? Jacob asked nervously. Maybe, Rachel replied. Or someone new. Either way, we're not taking chances. She activated the farm security systems and called Daniel. We've got eyes on a suspicious vehicle near the property line, she reported. I'll have a team sweep the area, Daniel said. Sit tight. Hours later, the SUV was gone, but Rachel's instincts told her the threat hadn't disappeared. Kara, who had been monitoring cartel communications, confirmed her suspicions. There's chatter about loose ends, Kara explained over the phone. Sounds like Cortez's people are planning something, but they're keeping it tight-lipped. They know we're listening. Rachel sighed. They're watching and waiting for an opportunity. Exactly, Kara replied. They'll test your defenses before making a big move. Let them try, Rachel said. We'll be ready. Word of the cartel's defeat spread quickly through the town. Neighbors and local ranchers visited the farm to offer their support. Sheriff Walker organized patrols to keep watch over nearby properties, determined to prevent any further incursions. You've become a symbol, Rachel, Walker said as they stood near the fence line. People look up to you now. You stood your ground when no one else could. I'm just protecting my family, Rachel replied. And in doing that, you've inspired a lot of people, Walker said. But that makes you a target too. You know that, right? I do, Rachel said quietly. But I'm not going anywhere. That evening, a stranger arrived at the farm, a woman named Rosa Alvarez. Rachel recognized her name immediately. Rosa had once been one of Cortez's trusted lieutenants before defecting from the cartel. I heard you took down Diego, Rosa said, stepping out of her car with her hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. I thought it was time we talked. Why are you here? Rachel asked cautiously. I want to help, Rosa replied. Cortez doesn't take betrayal lightly. He'll come for you, just like he came for me when I tried to leave. But I know how he operates. I can give you an edge. Rachel studied her for a long moment before nodding. Come inside. Let's talk. As Rosa explained Cortez's tactics, Kara intercepted a coded message confirming their worst fears. Cortez had dispatched a strike team to the area. They were planning a coordinated attack on the farm within the next 48 hours. We've got confirmation, Kara said over the speakerphone. They're moving fast. Rachel's jaw tightened. Then we move faster. Rosa, you said you know how Cortez thinks. What's his play? He'll try to isolate you first, Rosa explained. Cut off your allies, then hit you hard when you least expect it. We need to hit him first. Rachel nodded. Then that's what we'll do. We take the fight to him. The team quickly mobilized, preparing for what would be their most dangerous mission yet. Shadow paced near the truck, sensing the rising tension. Rachel knelt beside him, stroking his fur. This is it, she whispered. We end this. Shadow barked softly, ready for the battle ahead. The farm bustled with quiet urgency as Rachel, Daniel, and the rest of the team finalized their plan to strike before Cortez's men could launch their attack. Time was running out, and Rachel knew the key to victory lay in catching Cortez off guard. We hit his supply hub first, Daniel explained, pointing to a satellite map on the table in the barn. This compound is one of his key logistics centers. Without it, he won't have the resources to mount a full assault. Rachel studied the map. He'll have guards, maybe even backup from his syndicate. We'll need to move fast and hit them hard. Shadow barked quietly from the corner, as if sensing the tension in the room. Good, Rachel said softly. Let's make this count. The team departed under the cover of night, heading toward the compound located deep in a desolate canyon. Daniel had provided intel suggesting it wasn't heavily fortified, but Rachel's instincts told her otherwise. As they approached, Kara's voice came through on the radio. Rachel, I'm seeing heat signatures. More than expected, at least 30 guards. Looks like Cortez reinforced the site. Figures, Rachel muttered. Everyone stay sharp. Shadow with me. They moved silently through the canyon, taking cover behind large rocks as they surveyed the compound. Just as they prepared to breach the perimeter, gunfire erupted from the cliffs above. Ambush! Daniel shouted. Guards hidden in elevated positions opened fire, pinning the team down. Shadow barked and crouched low beside Rachel as bullets ricocheted off the rocks around them. We've got snipers. Rachel yelled into her radio. Find cover and return fire. Joanna and her team fired back, but the cartel had the high ground. They needed a way to shift the momentum. Shadow, go! Rachel commanded. Shadow dashed through the darkness, navigating the uneven terrain with ease. He reached the base of the cliff and climbed a narrow path, using his agility to stay out of sight. One of the snipers, focused on the firefight below, didn't see the dog until it was too late. Shadow pounced, knocking the sniper off balance and causing him to drop his rifle. Rachel took advantage of the distraction, firing a well-placed shot that took out another guard. Snipers are down. Move in, she ordered. The team advanced, closing the distance to the compound. Explosions from Joanna's grenades rocked the perimeter, sending the remaining guards into disarray. We've broken through, Daniel reported. Rachel led the charge into the main building, sweeping through rooms with calculated precision. The guards inside were caught off guard by the team's rapid advance. Shadow darted ahead, ensuring the path was clear. They reached a large storage area filled with crates of weapons and supplies. Rachel planted explosives at key points around the room. Set the charges and get clear, she instructed. Done, Daniel confirmed. We've got 5 minutes before this place goes up. As they retreated, Rachel heard footsteps echoing in the hallways. A new group of guards stormed the building, blocking their exit. We're cut off, Joanna shouted. We'll make a new exit, Rachel said, shooting out a window. Everyone out. The team climbed through the window and sprinted across the compound as the explosives detonated behind them. The blast shook the ground, sending a fireball into the sky. That's one less resource for Cortez, Daniel said with a grin. Don't celebrate yet, Rachel warned. He'll know we were here. Back at his headquarters, Cortez watched the aftermath of the attack through a video feed. His jaw clenched as flames consumed the supply depot. She's good, he muttered. But she just made a mistake. Now I know where she is. He turned to his lieutenant. Double the strike force. We hit her farm at dawn. I want every man ready. As the team returned to the farm, Rachel received an unexpected call from Miguel Estrada, the former cartel member who had warned her before. You hit Cortez hard, Miguel said. He's furious, and he's coming for you. I figured, Rachel replied. Any advice? Yeah. Don't give him a chance to surround you. He'll send a lot of men, but they're not all loyal. If you can take out his commanders, the rest will break. Thanks, Miguel, Rachel said. Stay safe. Good luck, Rachel. You'll need it. The farm became a hive of activity as Rachel and her team fortified their defenses. Tripwires, barricades, and ambush points were set up across the property. Shadow patrolled the perimeter, his senses on high alert. We've got one shot at this, Rachel said during the final briefing. Cortez will throw everything he has at us. But this is our home. We stand and fight. The team nodded in agreement. They had faced impossible odds before, and they would do it again. Get some rest, Rachel added. We'll need all our strength tomorrow. As the night deepened, Rachel stood alone by the fence, staring into the darkness. Shadow sat beside her, his eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. This is it, she whispered. One way or another, it ends here. Shadow barked softly, as if to say he understood. Together, they waited for dawn and the final battle. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon, the farm lay in tense silence. Rachel and her team were ready, each of them stationed at key positions around the property. Every trap was set, every defense reinforced. They knew Cortez's men were coming, and this time, they wouldn't be holding anything back. Shadow prowled the perimeter, his ears alert to the slightest sound. Rachel adjusted her rifle and scanned the distant tree line through her binoculars. The fields beyond the farm stretched endlessly, peaceful on the surface, but she knew danger was lurking just beyond. Anything? Daniel's voice crackled through the radio. Not yet, Rachel replied, but they're close. I can feel it. Moments later, Kara's voice broke through the radio, tense with urgency. Rachel, we've got movement, multiple vehicles approaching from the east and south. They're splitting their forces. Rachel cursed under her breath. Classic pincer maneuver. They want to hit us from both sides. How many? Daniel asked. At least 40 men, Kara said. They're bringing everything they've got. Good, Rachel replied coldly. Let's show them they made a mistake. She signaled to the team. Positions. Remember, we control the battlefield. We take out their commanders first and break their morale. The ground rumbled as the convoy of cartel vehicles neared the property. Shadow let out a low growl, his hackles rising. Rachel knelt beside him, whispering softly, This is our home. They don't get to take it. The first truck crossed the fence line, triggering one of the tripwires. A deafening explosion rocked the front field, sending debris flying. The vehicle flipped onto its side, flames engulfing its engine. Contact. They've breached the east fence. Danny called over the radio. Engage. Rachel ordered. Gunfire erupted as the team opened fire on the advancing cartel soldiers. Rachel took aim and fired a clean shot, dropping one of the enemy leaders. Shadow darted ahead, flanking a group of attackers and taking down a man before vanishing into the tall grass. In the chaos, Rosa Alvarez moved with deadly precision, targeting key figures in Cortez's strike force. She had once been one of them, but today, she was fighting alongside Rachel. Rosa, the south side is getting heavy fire, Daniel reported. On it, Rosa replied, moving swiftly toward the southern perimeter. As she approached a group of cartel soldiers, one of them recognized her. Rosa, you're fighting against us now? I stopped fighting for monsters like Cortez a long time ago, she said coldly. She raised her weapon and fired, taking the man down before he could respond. Her betrayal further demoralized the attackers, who began hesitating under the relentless pressure from Rachel's team. "They're breaking formation," Joanna called over the radio. "We've got them on the run." Despite the chaos, Rachel knew the battle wasn't over. Salvador Cortez himself was here, watching from a distance. He wasn't the type to rely solely on his men. He would step in when the time was right to turn the tide. Sure enough, Rachel spotted a black SUV pulling up near the southern tree line. Cortez stepped out, flanked by his personal guards. He scanned the battlefield with cold, calculating eyes. "Rachel, he's here," Daniel warned. "South side." "I see him," Rachel replied, narrowing her eyes. "This ends now." Rachel made her way through the firefight, using the chaos to her advantage. Shadow stayed close by her side as they moved toward Cortez's position. When she finally reached the clearing near the trees, she stepped out into the open, weapon raised. "Cortez!" she shouted. He turned slowly to face her, his expression calm and almost amused. "Rachel Porter, I've heard a lot about you." "Good. Then you know how this ends," Rachel said, aiming her rifle at him. Cortez chuckled softly. "You think you've won? You're just delaying the inevitable. There's always someone waiting to take my place." "Not today," Rachel said. "This is your last stand." Cortez's guards raised their weapons, but Shadow lunged at the nearest one, taking him down in a flurry of movement. Rachel fired a quick shot, hitting the second guard. "Looks like you're out of friends," Rachel said, advancing on Cortez. He drew a pistol, but Rachel was faster. She disarmed him with a single shot to his hand, sending the weapon flying. Cortez fell to his knees, clutching his bleeding hand. "It's over," Rachel said coldly. "Your empire dies with you." With Cortez captured and his commanders eliminated, the remaining cartel soldiers scattered. Some surrendered, while others fled into the woods. The sounds of gunfire faded, replaced by the crackling of burning vehicles and the distant shouts of Rachel's team securing the area. "We've got him," Daniel reported. "The rest are retreating." Rachel stood over Cortez, her heart pounding with adrenaline. Shadow growled softly, standing guard beside her. "This is what happens when you come after my family," she said quietly. Cortez glared at her but said nothing. His reign was over. As law enforcement arrived to take Cortez and his men into custody, Kara called in with another update. "Rachel, I've got intel you need to hear," she said. Cortez wasn't acting alone. "There's another syndicate operating behind the scenes. They might retaliate." Rachel exhaled slowly. "Of course there is. This fight never really ends, does it?" "No," Kara replied. "But you've made a statement. They'll think twice before coming after you again." Rachel looked toward the horizon, her resolve hardening. Let them try. Back at the farm, the team celebrated their hard-earned victory. Neighbors brought food and supplies, grateful for Rachel's bravery. Shadow lay peacefully at Rachel's feet as Jacob hugged her tightly. "We did it, Mom," he whispered. "We did," Rachel replied with a smile. "But we'll always stay ready." The farm stood stronger than ever, a beacon of resilience in the face of darkness. Rachel knew that threats would always come, but as long as she had her family, her team, and Shadow, she would never back down. The farm stood under a bright, clear sky. The air smelled of smoke and earth from the aftermath of the battle, but peace had finally returned. The cartel was broken, their leaders captured or scattered. Rachel walked the perimeter of her property, taking in the quiet. Shadow followed closely by her side, his gait steady and confident. The fight was over, for now. Nearby, Jacob practiced flying his drone again. His laughter echoed through the fields, a reminder of why Rachel had fought so hard to protect this place. "You've earned some rest, boy," Rachel said to Shadow, ruffling his fur. "We all have." But deep down, Rachel knew the cartel's defeat wasn't the end. Kara's warning about the hidden syndicate still echoed in her mind. There's always another threat. Later that morning, Sheriff Walker arrived at the farm. His expression was serious as he handed Rachel a sealed folder. "We got this from one of the cartel lieutenants we picked up," he said. "They were working with someone higher up, a syndicate with influence across several countries." Rachel opened the folder and scanned the documents inside. Names, financial records, Encoded communications pointed to a much larger operation than she had imagined. Cortez was just a piece of the puzzle, Walker continued. They'll come after you eventually. People like this don't let things go. Rachel closed the folder, her jaw tightening. Then we'll be ready. They won't catch us off guard. Walker nodded. If you need anything, you know where to find me. Thanks, Sheriff, Rachel said. That evening, Daniel pulled Rachel aside for a private conversation. I got a call from Langley, he said. The agency heard about what went down here. They're impressed, and they want you to come back. Rachel raised an eyebrow. I thought I was done with them. Technically, you are, Daniel said with a smirk. But they're offering a position with a new task force. You'd be helping dismantle syndicates like Cortez's before they can take root. They think you're perfect for the job. Rachel crossed her arms, considering the offer. And what about the farm? Jacob? You'd still have control over your life here, Daniel assured her. They know you're not leaving this place. It'd be on your terms. After a long pause, Rachel shook her head. Not yet. My priority is keeping my family safe. But tell them I'll think about it. Daniel nodded. Fair enough. Just know you've got options. Over the following days, the farm and surrounding properties saw a resurgence of hope and unity. Neighbors worked together to repair fences, plant new crops, and clean up the remnants of the battle. Jacob became a local hero in his own right. Kids from nearby farms came by to see the drone that had helped spot the sniper. Shadow, meanwhile, became a beloved figure in the community, earning treats and praise wherever he went. Mom, do you think the bad guys will come back? Jacob asked one night as they sat by the fire pit. Rachel wrapped an arm around his shoulders. Maybe, but if they do, we'll be ready. We're not alone anymore. Jacob nodded and leaned against her, comforted by her words. Rosa Alvarez, the former cartel lieutenant who had helped Rachel, decided to stay in the area. With the cartel gone, she wanted to rebuild her life away from the violence and corruption that had once consumed her. You've got a clean slate now, Rachel told her. What are you going to do with it? I'm not sure, Rosa admitted, but I want to help others who've been trapped in this life. People need to know there's another way. You've already taken the first step, Rachel said. You stood up to them. That takes strength. Rosa smiled faintly. Thanks, Rachel. I owe you for giving me a second chance. We owe each other, Rachel replied. We survived this together. One night, Rachel received another message from Kara. Rachel, we've intercepted more intel on the syndicate. They're reorganizing. You might not have as much downtime as you'd hoped. Rachel sighed but wasn't surprised. Thanks, Kara. Keep me updated. You got it, Kara replied. Just stay safe. After ending the call, Rachel gazed out over the fields. The night was calm, the stars shining brightly above. It was a rare moment of peace, but Rachel knew it wouldn't last forever. Rachel gathered the team in the barn for one final meeting. We did something incredible here, she said, her voice steady and resolute. We protected this farm, this community, and each other. But we have to stay strong. There are always going to be threats. The important thing is that we face them together. Daniel raised his glass. To standing together. To the future, Rachel added. Everyone raised their glasses in unison, a shared sense of purpose binding them.